Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Philippines. It is the evening where I am, and it is late in the evening, but I feel like I am with you in the Philippines and elsewhere in Southeast Asia, particularly in Bangkok, where there are people there who are with us. I'd like first to start by thanking the very people who made this sharing with you possible. I'd like to say, mahalo no ilawa, agyamanak, dagang salamat, salamat karajao, merci beaucoup to President Dr. Luz Hammershaimb, Vice President Dr. Marina Abella, webinar convener Dr. Maria Martha Manet, Madrid, and webinar chair Dr. Romel Tabula. I'd like to level the playing field, and I'm gonna say and tell you exactly what I offer in this sharing with you today. What I'm offering is a meditation or a set of meditations on how to do and why we do Ilokano lexicography. And I must warn you, and I must tell you that I am offering a different accounting of a language in particular, the Ilokano language, and what this language is all about, how is it connected to the people who speak it, and the people who claim it as their own. And these are the members of what you would call the Ilocano speech community. I'm offering here several sets of approaches so that in the end, I hope that we are going to be on the same page. And I'm offering what you would call this partnership between the definitions and a definiendum. In the pair, which I call the correlative pair between the definiendum and the definiens, one concept is being defined, and the one that defines that which is being defined forms what you would call this partnership of definiens and definiendum. This is exactly what we see when we see, for instance, a dictionary with a lexical entry in the definition of that entry. There are, of course, other dictionaries that offer you, for example, etymologies, synonyms, antonyms. But there are also dictionaries that somehow, in a way, bring in other languages that somehow, in a way, related to, more or less, by contact or by source, other languages. So in the case, for example, of Ilokano, I made it a point to somehow bring in the etymological dynamic of lexical entry. For instance, let's say the word arak, and which is also your Tagalog alak. Arak, when you go purist with the Ilocano language, is not really Ilocano, but is sourced somewhere else. Even, for example, the Ilocano marunggay. The Ilocano who does not know that marunggay is not originally an Ilocano term, but a Tamil term, must begin to sit down and say that the Ilocano language, even if there was what you would call a backbone of that language in the beginning, had been and continues to borrow and appropriate from some other sources until today. And in order to enrich that language, that Ilocano language, we have to keep on borrowing, because it is not the case that we have all the terms of our own experiences, the terms of our own Ilocano experiences. And that we must always consider, and we must always recognize this, that the human experience, and in particular the Ilocano human experience, is always richer, more expansive. It's broader than the Ilocano language. And so therefore, the Ilokano language must in fact continue to try to describe that expansive, that rich Ilocano experience, that rich human experience, which is shared by the Ilocanos. We are trying to clarify some ideas here, which I call as the forest of ideas in this presentation. There is some kind of a forest in this term. So we worked on the idea of definiendum a while ago. We have worked on the relationship between definiendum and definiens. And now I'm moving to another aspect, another important term in the title of this presentation. And this is education that is liberatory, and its connection to your fourth bullet, which is your lexicographic act, and the importance, for example, of words that we need to somehow deploy in order to come to terms with that crucial, critical, important, relevant human experience that you need to mediate the same experience that we were talking about in the previous slides. And also I'm bringing in the importance of words. Words by themselves create, they produce, they in fact bring about world. I call this the worlding, meaning to say we create a world because we have this capacity to deploy the power and that kind of a hidden potency of words. Now, we need also to underscore that words by themselves need to be protected. They are not innocent. Words can wound. Words also can heal. Words can encourage, but words also can bring about disappointment, discouragement, and they can bring death to a people, to the user of the word, and to a community, and by extension, to a society. And that's why it's always necessary for us to look into that kind of a hidden power words have, and to be able to somehow understand that this power must be protected. And so in your last bullet on the slide, we were talking about the need for a protect, this kind of a conscious understanding of how much we can deploy the words of the human language. What are the limits? What are the creative potentials? And the potentials in the plural, I call it sometimes the creative possibilities of the words of a human language. And a lexicographer, in our fourth bullet that we are talking about in the same slide that we are referring to, is that person who is so conscious of the power of a word in a dictionary. Meaning to say that lexicographer is understood to somehow have that kind of an ability to figure out that words do matter, but then words can have what we call this nuances of meaning, this subtleties of suggestions, hints, cues, and clues. Meaning to say, eventually that lexicographer must understand that the words alone by themselves in the dictionary do not mean anything at all unless otherwise these words are used in a sentence. The smallest context of a word in the dictionary is your sentence of whatever kind. So when we tease out a particular lexical entry, a word from the dictionary, it's as useless as anything. That has to be deployed within the context of the sentence, at least in that sentence, to be able to account what could be one of its possible meanings within the context of a broader relationship with the words. I mean, are we saying that a word alone is sufficient to really come up with a sentence? In some cases, yes. In Ilokano, a word is enough. But that word we might see eventually in our analysis could be made up of at least two other elements, even if on the screen or on the page is only one word. The thing is, does it suggest a thought pattern? Is it somehow assuming the form of a sentence? Whether that one is still a fragment or a phrase, as long as it's productive at all, as long as it's productive for us to be able to somehow see and sense, that is suggesting, it is suggesting a meaning. So which means what I'm saying is that the lexicographer is conscious of the fact that the word that the lexicographer is putting in on the page of a dictionary can only do so much. That's why if it's possible that you are going to look into what we call the possibilities of meanings within or in that particular word, that lexicographer has to do that and exhaust all the possibilities of accounting possible meanings within the context of this sentence. I'm bringing out also these key issues here. Let me say that language is a site, it's a place, it is a case of a from. We think from a language, we act out our person from a language. It's a site, it's a situs, it's a logos, and we must always recognize that. And so therefore, in your third bullet, I'm saying that it is not sufficient to say that you are speaking or talking or thinking in a particular language. That in a particular language, thinking, talking in a particular language is, I think, a narrow-minded figuring out of what language can offer. But if we are going to move that in and say it's a from, then you are accounting the speaker, and you are also at the same time accounting the community of speakers or the speech community using or somehow owning that particular language. And so it leads us to your bullet number 4. I no longer believe in that lie that is somehow suggesting that language is a tool. In most of our educational systems, every one of us have been drummed into this idea that language is the tool, it's an instrument. So if you know this particular language, your life will be better because you will be able to somehow do that social mobility, go upward. And this, in fact, is fairly common, this understanding that it's an instrument, it's a tool. But let me ask you, if language really were a tool, and then a hammer is a tool, my question is there any way in which a person speaking from a language can get out of a language in a moment of his own or her own time? I ask that because if language were a tool, like a hammer is a tool, then if you don't need that hammer to hammer something, then by all means, if you are a disciplined, organized person, you put that hammer on a toolbox, right? And in that toolbox, then you are going to let that hammer live its own hammer life, right? The life of a hammer that is not just at this time. But there is no way by which we can do the same with language. There is not a single moment in which we don't deploy. We are, in fact, always already mediated by language, even as we try to mediate our experience and our world and our relationship by summoning the power of language, that kind of a language is so intimate to us, to our soul, and to our human spirit. And so what we are trying to say here is, if you live and still hold on to the belief that language is a tool and therefore you've got to learn how to use that kind of a tool, then we are reducing our understanding of what language is all about, how language is connected to our human person and our human societies and our human communities. And of course, the world around us, and how our thoughts and visions and ideas are being mediated by this language that we are talking about. What I'm trying to say is that the language in its act of mediation is always in the middle of our experience and our world, and there in the middle, language is there, and we cannot get out of it. Here I'm giving you a warning, and particularly those who are dreaming of becoming a lexicographer. Let me say this, and let me say this in a univocal way. I mean what I say, and I say what I mean in this. Lexicography is a thankless job. It is. Don't expect that people will thank you for doing that lexicographic work of the language that you do know that you can do best, or you do know that you know how to do it, how to do the accounting of the words of that language that you know. Don't expect it. Second bullet, you do a lexicography, you be ready to become a poor man like me. I'm not sure, but probably only Webster got rich. I'm not even sure what I'm talking about when he put together the Webster's Dictionary of the English Language. But nope. If you think that you can earn a living by writing a dictionary, forget it. You will not live. You'll be ready to remain poor. And this sums up my last warning. You want to be the poorest academic in town, the poorest person in town, the poorest writer in town. Write a dictionary. All right? Please do not say that I didn't warn you. I did. I just did. Let's go to the next slide before we end up with something so desperate. I don't want to go back to the desperate nature of lexicography. But there is one thing that we can expect from writing a dictionary. We get what I call a psychic reward. What does it mean? You will have this reward that you were able to somehow do something for a particular language, for a particular people, for a particular community. And you will feel that. I would say it's this feel-good thing. You will feel it in your heart. You will feel it in your soul. You will feel it in your bones, in your body, in your cells, and of course in your head. Which means that if you have finished writing a dictionary, you will realize that you have given yourself the chance to connect with what you call the nameless. This no longer present, non-existent ancestors, the producers of a particular language. And in this case, I was doing, for example, Ilokano. I thought that I was in fact connecting to and with the ancestors of Ilokano, moving from how it was in the beginning, how it is rooted, for example, to the Austronesian people, and some other people from which some words of this Ilocano language were borrowed, were appropriated from. And then part, therefore, of the psychic reward is a deep understanding of what I call the indigenous ontology and epistemology of a people who own the language. Now, when we talked about ontology, we talked about the sense of being, the sense of the existence of these people. How are they, these people in this world, in this universe, and let's say in relationship to each other? And then, of course, the epistemological, the epistemic, is this understanding, this knowledge that through this language, these people get to understand themselves, other people, and the world around them. This deep understanding must, as I said, come with this psychic reward. You will never get rich in writing a dictionary, but you will feel that kind of a connection with who owns that language you are working on. And those who initially, I don't know, put these things together, which I call simply as the ancestors of the particular language. Now I'm putting in here the foundational attitude of a lexicographer. Okay, so by lexicographer here, I'm now trying to somehow make it more general, but in particular, I'm of course concerned with the Ilokano lexicographer. Now, there's one thing that we need to work on. We need to understand as foundational. One is the idea of humility. Humility is a Latin term that got into Spanish, but then it really was originally Latin, and it comes from the word humus. The humus is the soil, the ground, the earth beneath your feet, the one that you step on. And so we are dealing with what we call this groundedness. So the lexicographer, therefore, must be grounded, must know her or his ground. And by having that, we are open to the fact that you do not know a lot. But at least you know that you do not know, and that's enough. You know that you do not know a lot. And that will open up your heart and say, hey, I know that I do not know a lot, and therefore I'm willing to know more. Humus, humility. And the other one is this idea of community of speakers. The lexicographer must look at herself or himself as a novice in with respect to this community of speakers, meaning to say you are going to a community of speakers of that language because you do not know a lot, and therefore you have to trust them and trust them that they, the speakers, will be able to lead you to finding out these elements of the language that you need to be able to put together the dictionary. Is it possible that these community speakers have the ability to write their own dictionary? That's possible. But the fact is, they don't. And so the lexicographer has this special place, even as the lexicographer knows that he or she does not know enough, and yet also has that capacity to trust the speakers that do not have time, probably even the means, but probably even the resources to somehow sit down and write every word of their language, every word that they remember. Now we get to what you would call now the corollary foundational attitude of the lexicographer. I call this the openness of heart, the soul, the spirit, and even the body. I mean, you have to include, if you are a lexicographer, the body, your body is speaking and include that all the time. And then your ears, literally, and that extends the idea of the mind. You have to be using those ears in your mind all the time. And you try as much to be all saying and all seeing through. All seeing through is my invention to mean that you try as much to somehow get past a veil between you that separates you and the community of speakers. That has to be somehow penetrated so that all the cues and the clues will come to you. It's not easy, but it can only be done with openness of heart, with openness of soul and body and spirit. Now, I have this funny attitude. I call it this sadomasochism, okay? With the lexicographer as a masochist. Yeah, masochism in Freudian psychology saying is you enjoy pain. There's a certain pleasure that you feel when you suffer. I'm gonna be warning you that at a certain point, this what's what happens to a lexicographer. Why so the act of gathering and collecting the words of a language, where is the beginning of that and where does that end? I do not know. In total, and I will show you later on, I have written 4 dictionaries of the Ilokano language, some of them multilingual dictionaries, meaning to say I was really cutting across, for example, going into English and Ilocano and Tagalog and so on down the line. But there had always been this pain of realizing that the words come to you even at a time that you don't want them. Let me tell you my story. I would be driving and a word would come in. What would I do? I try as much to remember that word that came to me. Sometimes I succeed, but oftentimes I fail. Now, while I am driving and a word comes, I would call my phone in my office at the university and I would leave a voicemail. And when I get there, I would get into that voicemail and then record what I left as a message. That was before a law came that did not yet make illegal the use of your phone while you are driving. Today, you cannot do that. In the state where I am in, when a policeman catches you doing that, you are penalized for $300 for doing that. That's $300. Okay, now, what else do I do to somehow make a semblance of success in remembering the word that comes to me? I do not throw away my gas receipts, and I have always a ball pen on my side. So while I'm driving, I'm praying to the angels and say, please, angels, make me safe. I'm going to write this word X. I write it at the back of a receipt. Oftentimes, my writing ends up unreadable, but I have a sense of what that is. If I at least figure out maybe the first couple of letters, maybe some syllables, So that's how tough it is. And so it appears that in this kind of a masochism, these words come to you and as if they are talking to you, please, please, write me, write who am I? They're talking to you. And you act like crazy. Often in my sleep, I dream of words. And in the darkness, I write this on papers by my bedside in the darkness. And so what I'm trying to say here is that there is so much sacrifice when you do lexicographic work. It's not funny, but it's commitment that really is pushing you to do it. Keep doing it. There are textual issues, or what I call them textualities, in doing what we call Ilokano lexicography. I talk about context, for example, subtext, paratext, intertext, pretext, subtext, plain text, and hypertext. Okay, I'm going to be picking up some of this without boring you. So I'll say, for example, context. Okay, so what I did in this current dictionary that I'm doing right now, it's actually the multilingual Ilocano dictionary and thesaurus. So I'm bringing in Spanish, English and Tagalog, plus etymologies, synonyms, and antonyms. But the operative lexical entry is Ilocano. So I'm bringing all those things. So it's really a broader project. Let's say the word, for example, laud. I look into what that is. And in the case of the Ilocano, laud is geographically always the west. And it's where the sea is, and it's where the sun sets. Always. And in the east, this would be your, I call them the Cordilleras, the dancing mountains, dancing giants. And it's always where the raya is, the ray of the sun. So I tried to connect this in terms of the context, like the raya, the letter R, has an allophone which could be the L or the D, and in some cases, probably the T when you refer, for example, to English language. So these are called the allophonic dynamics of what we could be elementary sounds of a language. So Daya and Raya are connected. So I said, this is the sun, where the sun comes in. So there is a context in what this thing is all about. And in the Laud, if the T is allophonic to the D, then the Laud is the same as the Laot, which in fact, Laot is an old Austronesian term to mean the sea. And it's correct in the Ilocano language and in the Ilocano geography and in the Ilocano experience. Very correct. Amyanan, we know, is the place of the Amyan. But we know that Amyan is the north wind. So when the wind comes from the north, then that's Amyan, and it's coming from the north, therefore it's the place where the Amyan comes from. With the under is suffix talking about place. It's an is a suffix for a place, at least in this respect. Now, the south wind is a bagat, and where it comes from is from the southern part of the Ilocos. So it's a bagatan. And so this idea of the Ilocano about her world, about his universe, about his compass, his geography is complete. You have Amyanan, you have Abagatan, you have Laud, you have Daya. It's complete. You can never be lost. But there is a problem in terms of this ideas of textualities, especially when we don't scrutinize where these entries come from. For example, the word vegan. Vegan is in fact biga or biga. It's a class of a taro which is giant, which presumably was we all found them in an abundance in vegan at that time. Now the colonizers came in, so the B became V. That's what happened. Now, what about Kandong in Ilocos Sur? What about other places, for instance, like I was reading up on some toponyms, being said these are actually names of places, and I found one, well, not exactly, not found one, many in fact, the name of Balawan. And I was laughing because even the town of Balawan in its official site is wrong in what this Balawan is all about. It's talking about a colonial narrative that says that there was this encounter between Spanish soldier and the indigenous people, presumably the Ilokanos. And then eventually there's a gun that was being used, and then awan bala, balawan. I was laughing. Even in official records, even in the record today, we are repeating the same mistakes. That's not true. So context. Now, what are we having here? We need to become aware that the text that we have, which in fact is the lexical entry, brings in other kinds of texts: context, subtext, paratext, intertext, pretext, separate plain text, hypertext. This must be within the purview of the one doing the lexicography. You cannot lose this. You must be always mindful of this. Balawan, by the way, in a funny way, it's not. Nothing to do with Spaniards. It's a place where the balaw tree, which is a relative of the lawan, which is a hardwood, abound. That's the case. This toponym, therefore, is based on this abundant flora at that place in those times. So, meaning to say, the lexicographer cannot be so innocent, cannot be so naive. You really have to ask questions. If what you are putting in the dictionary is really true, is really warranted by facts, you have to do a lot of corroboration, triangulation. Otherwise, you are repeating a mistake. You can't do that. Now, you were talking about the question of the liberatory here. And then I'd like you to look into the idea of liberatory as something to do with how lexicography can become a means by which we are able to mediate our pursuit of freedom. Meaning to say, the dictionary making act must have that sense that this could become a means, a mechanism by which we can understand, announce, and pursue freedom. What does it mean? It means simply that a dictionary must be always critically conscious of what it is meant for, what is gonna be its end, its stellic orientation. Without that, we cannot pursue it. It has to teach people about what you would call this, elements of their own language that somehow would make their minds more expansive, their consciousness raised, and their ability to scrutinize becoming keener. And I bring in, for example, the indigenous concept, waya waya, which is the Ilokano for freedom. I would have used the term Ilokano, but there are other people here who are not Ilocano, so I decided not to. But I am including it so that in the end, the Ilocano lexicography must be a means by which we pursue also the ends of something grander. And that is called waya, waya waya, or the ability to really live a life that is independent of the pressures of, let's say, the vagaries of power in politics and elsewhere. Now, also part of the liberatory education is the determined purpose. I call it intentional with an S. It's the determination, and this determination is purposive. And it must account what I call substantive social transformation. The consciousness that is supposed to be somehow be equipped among, let's say, the older people, the andragogy, and of course the younger people, pedagogy. And thus, in the end, the lexicographic work must be able to somehow, in a way, lead to what I call critical engagement with the oppressive forces of society, the community of speakers of a particular language. Now, I look into this intellectual attitudes, and I am bringing in, for example, two attitudes in understanding grammar, describing, let's say, the words of the lexicographic lexicography of a particular language. And there are two modes. Descriptive, you simply are describing what it is, what you see on the ground. There is this prescriptive, which is you are telling them that this is the better way. This is what it's supposed to be. When you say this is not what actually is found on the ground. My point here is, if you are a lexicographer, what is the attitude that you're supposed to be taking? In my case, I did not reduce that into an either or, but what I did is to put them together and combine them. That I was still respectful of the speakers of that language, but at the same time, I was also telling them that A, based on facts, what you know is not correct. So I was prescribing what I thought was correct based on certain logic and reason and facts. And therefore, that kind of an attitude of being able to respect the source of that language, particularly the source from the ground, and then the ability to somehow, in a way, tinker with it by telling and educating the speakers of that language that there is this certain way by which we can do things this way. It's one in which we are still respectful of the intellectual resource of the people. That what you do is not anti-people, it's not anti-development, it's not anti-community, but in fact, it's the opposite. You are with the people. You are with that language, and you hope that language is gonna be better next time around. Why did I do this? When I began writing the dictionary many years ago, I started doing this dictionary, at least the first one. I was still a professor at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. I started collecting those words. That was a long time ago. And then when I migrated, I was bringing all these boxes of index cards that I collected to wherever I went. So, and I was moving in the US, the first box to be shipped to the place that I was going was this box of index cards All right, so I'm doing this because I think that all our human actions are situated. And when we speak a language, we are already situating ourselves within the context of that language. And when we do act as academics, or what I might call intellectuals, there are two ways by which we can follow the way of the other side, the way that is one side. Whether you are conscious or not, you are already choosing side. You cannot have a neutral position when you are doing intellectual work, when you are doing academic work. Either you perpetuate the same oppressive forces or you don't. Staying in the middle means that you are perpetuating it, you are siding with the perpetrators. And the lexicographers must be mindful of that. You are taking part in the intellectual life of a community, that speaks that language. We said lexicography is an intellectual act. It's never ending. It will never end. And let me say, lexicographic work is both ethical and moral. You are deciding what is good and what is bad when you are a lexicographer. You must continue to do that. And knowing that your tasks is never finished, you have to keep on doing it in an unending way. What are the challenges? I would tell that who will publish a dictionary? Come on. Well, I was just lucky that with my first dictionary, there was this person, an academic who put up a publishing house who was willing to wage her resources so that my first dictionary could be published. That's a tough call. It's an 800-page dictionary, thousands of copies. How much did it take her? How much money was put in, sunk in to produce it? Who? I don't know. Not in this country, not abroad. So are you taking chances? Who will finance it? And so we ask that final question in this slide. What are you as a lexicographer? Are you really a certified masochist? Now go look for the sadist who is your partner. And I'm saying that with a smile because it's true. It's true. We talked about theory here now. So how do we bring about this idea of theory? You really have to go back to the sources. You cannot not go back to the sources. Number two, you really have to go to the field. Go with the people. Go around. In my case, I went around the US. I went around in some places in Europe. I went around in practically in the entire country where I know there are Ilocanos. Now, next point, you have to really go back to the errors in this published text before you. Now, and then also that kind of a critical mind that you need to put in to have to be able to critically review all these materials before, whether written or told you from your fieldwork. So the key there is triangulation, it's corroboration. To be able to state that's a fact, this lexical entry, there has to be a way by which this one is corroborated. Otherwise, you can't put it in there. You need to brush up your idea of what lexicographic work is. You need an understanding of the dynamics of other languages. I was lucky, accidentally so, because in my past life, I had exposures to other languages other than the Ilokano language of my father. My mother is not even Ilocano, it's Pangasinan. So, but I heard Pangasinan, but I heard more and I grew more with Ilocano. I don't have knowledge of Pangasinan. I only have this what you would call, you can't even be happy with it. You cannot be even respect yourself for that kind of a small knowledge, insufficient knowledge of your mother's language. So I had, but apart from that, I had exposure to some languages and I understood the dynamics, the kind of a behavior I had. Like, I was so surprised that I was good, for example, when I took up my Hebrew. And I had a joke with a classmate who was sitting with me in those days and who became a priest, but I did not become a priest, and who was always copying from me. It's not that he was really intentionally copying, but I was not when we had exams. I was not covering my paper. And then this language does not have any vowel at all. I was able to decipher what those things were. And so when I'm telling you the story, it means that you don't have to be so narrow in an understanding of your language. You need to really broaden to be able to understand how other languages operate. Of course, we talked about, for example, Latin and Greek and Espanol, had also exposure to Italian and eventually French. So I began to understand how this language behaved. And so, in effect, there's this broadening need, they need to expand our understanding of what language is all about, how the philosophy, the philological aspect of language really operates. The theory part talks about the ontic and the ontological, the epistemic and the epistemological. The ontic and the ontological, I in fact initially talked about this. It's the sense of being, the sense of existence that happens and that we see, that we sense in our encounter with the language, particularly in the elements of this language. And the epistemic and the epistemological suggest what you would call our knowledge, the kind of knowledge that we draw from our understanding of a particular language. We're trying to do here now the dance of theory and practice. So the part of my talk is about theory and practice of Ilokano lexicography for a certain end, liberatory education. Now I'm talking about theory and practice now. First off is we need to have what we call a critical review of what we had already in the past. And also to somehow, in a way, looked into what is missing. The colonizers, for instance, we talked about colonizers destroying what are documents they saw they had. Also, we need to look into, for example, about what can we do with what we have got in terms of, let's say, the colonial records. In 1572, the colonizers came to Ilocos. What happened? So an understanding of this history of what happened would somehow, in a way, make us understand that kind of an encounter. That encounter is linguistic in some ways. That's the reason why, for example, there is so much ignorance in the way places are named. Because apparently there is always this case of misunderstanding between the colonizer and this quote unquote ignorant native, ignorant Ilocanos. The dance of theory and practice number 2. Now, for example, in Doctrina Christiana, a scholar talked about a 1621 printing of this one. It's not true. I looked into it in 1620, the oldest one, probably is the only existing copy. It's actually in the Lopez Museum. No, it's 1622. So we have to correct these errors. Also, look into the contradictions that really are going to be affecting your lexicographic entries. The Angalo and Aran. I looked into scholarship and then it's not true that there is an Aran. It was invented. And then in some accounts, Dr. Reyes said he invented the Aran because it's closer to the term Adan, which is a feminized Adam or Adam in the Hebrew language that got into Espanol and Latin and so on down the line. We look into, for example, another problem. Okay, there is this, let's say, foundational elements of philosophy put together with Father Mercado, and there is this idea that buot and loob and nakem are symmetrical. I tried to understand what this is, and I realized it's not true, that Father Mercado is wrong. And then I thought that what is closer to buot of the Cebuano Visaya is really the puot in Ilokano. Now, how do we start? We start with the idea of the importance of naming. And now it is important that in the Ilocano language, Nagan, the name, is basic. And so what I did in this dictionary is to be able to figure out the word of the Ilocanos by way of the name, the name, the Nagan. Now I'm bringing here two cases, like in the epic story of Lamang. Lamang told his mother, he said, "You name me Lamang." So it's that Ilocano act of naming yourself, and you don't wait for another to name you. Also, there is this Ilocano ritual of old. This is called the Bunyag Itisirok Tilatok. There is this account about when a child is sickly. The diagnosis that is the child is sickly because the name is not appropriate. So you have to change the name. It's called the name changing ritual. What happens is the noun is so important. And you must see that under noun, you can create already what we call verbs. You can create already here adjectives. That's the kind of a dynamic that we need to understand in the Ilocano language. So that, for example, the concrete word, no, it's the abstract word pintas, which is beauty. You just put in a na, which is a prefix that really is adjectival in character. It becomes adjective already. So pintas na pintas. And then from that word, you can turn it into a verb. So what happens? We need to understand that when we are doing a lexicography, we must accept that words cut across categories. And in many ways, many times we do that. The classes could stay, but even the classes really could give way to other classes of words. Now, I think that the key here is that what I call the miraculous power of the Ilocano affixal system. More than 300 of affixes. What do you do with these affixes? You tell me. These affixes really would tell you the kind of dynamic, the dynamism, this dynamo, the engine, the motor that the Ilocano language has, for as long as you know how to put it together. Let's see one point here. Umay ka manganin. That word umay ka. You know that umay ka is already a verb plus the actor. So the ka is the actor, is a pronoun. But you must see that umay is already inflected with the plus what I call the par or punget aramuta balikas, which is I. So umay ka, umay ka. So there is a glide. So you don't say anymore umay ka, but we say umay ka. All right. So that, for example, the I verb, which really is your punget aramuta balikas, you can create many other words like umay, makaumay, ayan, umayan, again, ay, again, umay, kakaumay, agkaraumay, kaumay, iya, ay. So all of these things are made possible by the kind of inflection that I would say miraculous affixal system of the Ilocano language. I was talking about this punget aramuta balikas, and this is how I teach my students and how to really analyze the morphophonemic development of a word coming from a bar. Let's see one example, the kan, kaan. So mangan comes from a par, which is kan, or its variant, it's kaan. So mangan, therefore, is mangkaan. And then we syncopate that the way we syncopate pinakbet to mean pakbet or vice versa. And so you have already here mangkaankan, which in fact is mangangkan on your screen. Now we have other possibilities here. Agkakaan, mangan, pangkaan, panangan, pinangan, pamakan, pamakan, makan. So this is how we do it. By understanding all this, what we call affix system and what the system does to the par, the lexical end. Now we're talking about now implications in liberatory education. I talked about the aggiornamento. Aggiornamento is the Italian for the updating process, meaning to say, here is a case wherein we have a language that somehow on record, we saw it for the first time written also in the Ilokano alphabet, Ilokano Koritan in 1620, and we need to update that. We just cannot simply reason and do this logic that the Ilocano language is complete and is already complete and final in 1620. You can't do that because the thoughts and the lives, the experiences of the people in 1620, these are no longer the same, perhaps no longer existing. If we compare this kind of a life that Ilocano people live today, they are not the same anymore. So you call that aggiornamento, is the kind of a purposive updating of what you have got. You need to do that. Now, we have to, in doing that, acknowledge that the lexicographer has no franchise of truth, and therefore it's always the case that we need to really be open to other versions of truth and meaning and the possibilities of the language you are working on. And in my case, Ilocano language. These are the products of what I did. These are the first 4 dictionaries there. The one on top is really a monolingual dictionary. I think that's almost 2,000 pages, the one on top. The others really are about 900, sometimes 1,000 for the others. So I have kept on, and I'm working now on a 5th volume. It's the multilingual and thesaurus. I'm working now with about 100,000 entries, but it's multilingual, so I'm bringing English, Spanish, and also Tagalog and some other languages that somehow I know they have this key concept. And then also I'm trying to put in antonyms as much as I can, and synonyms, and also etymologies. What are the challenges? Well, there are a lot, but we need to face these challenges. But then I'd like to bring attention to the one in the middle. That whatever that we say, Ilocano language is also, in a way, confronting itself with the idea of diversity and pluralism. There are many ways by which the Ilocano language is spoken, is written, and I call it the repertoire. And whatever that we do, we have to ask that question, which in fact is an ethical question. What's going to happen to this Ilocano language 100 years from now? What's going to happen? And we ask also that kind of a question as kind of a challenge as well when we say, where are Ilocano speakers at this time? It appears to me that there are so many professionals, even teachers, who don't have really that kind of a pride and somehow this understanding that the understanding of the Ilocano language and the use of the Ilocano language is important in the act of educating their own students. I don't see that. Not a lot of teachers really have that kind of consciousness. We talked about, for example, language and its registers. I sense this, that we don't need to learn Ilocano because we already know it. Is that so? Because you speak it, you know it, and that's sufficient? I do not know, but it does not make sense. Among American school children, they begin to learn their language even if they are born with that language as soon as they get into school, the school system, kindergarten, even nursery. What about the Ilokano? Nothing at all, practically nothing. Even, for example, the DepEd starts with grade 1 and ends with grade 3. What are we doing? What are we doing? Now, the next one is what's going to happen if the country does not respect, does not honor this diversity and plurality of the country with their more than 170 languages and therefore 170 expressions of the culture? What's going to happen? There's going to be this homogenization of the country, and our power, our resource as a diverse people with a plurality of understanding the world and ourselves and other people and communities, that will be erased, that will be lost. How do you respond to all these challenges? We have to say there is so much literacy of the Ilocano language among Ilocano people. Let's say that. And when I say that, I really mean it. I am saying it the way I say it, and I mean what I say, and I say what I mean. And we should be frank with this commitment, with our pursuit of what is diverse, what is plural, in our commitment to educating our people by the use of the Ilocano language and all other languages of this country. And then bullet number 3, register is real. I mean to say, the kind of a language, the kind of the local language that you use in the street is not the same as the kind of the local language that you use in the classroom, that you use, for example, in writing, that you use in poetry. You call it register. When you use the local language in a healthcare setting, there's a kind of a jargon that is needed in there, and that's called a register. We need to be able to distinguish those things as registers. And we don't say that the Ilocano language that we use on the street is good for the hospital or for the school system. It's not true. It does not take the way. It's not the way. I'm trying to somehow, in a way, theorize what this is gonna be, but this is somehow a suggestion that we need to be open to what is the modern contemporary world is, what it is, and what it tells us. The key point here is that we must guarantee that all our languages, the Ilocano language, must not only survive, but the key there is it must thrive, and it must thrive when it is being used by its people, by the community, by all sectors of social life, including education. That is the way to go. Now, I call this now part of the final thing, and I theorized about this several years ago. It is now high time for us to look into the possibilities of a high Ilocano for the purposes of academic, disciplinal orientations and professional use, and then a low Ilocano, which really are our everyday Ilocano, the popular forms, the forms from mass media and social media. When we bring this Ilocano to the academic community, we don't need the low Ilocano. What we need is a supplement, a higher form, and which I call high Ilocano. We see this, and we know that in this kind of an Ilocano thing, there is a concentric circle. We're not saying that we are destroying low Ilocano, but we need it to somehow, fuel our evolving of a high Ilocano in what we call the pattern of a continuum, a concentric circle. Let's not allow the last speaker of Ilocano die. And let us not allow our young people to go faddish, like whatever is in fashion. We just simply allow them to do that. No, we have to educate them really, the real education in the and from the Ilocano language. We should do this not only to Ilocano but to all Philippine languages. No, I'm not advocating only for Ilokano, but for all Philippine languages. We have killed 4 of our indigenous languages. Are we waiting for the next food to come about and die? Ethnologue says that a language, a human language, dies every 2 weeks. So we are killing, or we are allowing to die one language every 2 weeks. And if there are 54 weeks in a year, we are somehow permitting the death of 27 human languages every year. What's going to happen? The problem is if we don't do our part in protecting and in sustaining and making sure that our languages, Ilocano and all other languages, will thrive, we are in fact inaugurating linguicide, culturicide, idiocide, and I call in the last bullet the genocide of the mind. Of course, we don't want to become complicit in these forms of side. By way of wrapping up, mahalo no wilawa, dagang salamat, masukul tuod, kaimo. Good afternoon to all of you.